The mob boss, the drug kingpin, the dictator. As wicked as these people may be, is it wrong for us to learn from them and use some of their tactics in our own life? So I'm having lunch with a dear friend recently, and they shared a story of how they got blindsided with workplace deception again. And so I wanted to do an episode for this person without them really knowing about it, if that's at all possible. And I feel like if this podcast is something you happen to like, then you're probably, in general, a good person. So I want to help as many people as possible. And I've said it over and over again. The reality is that as good as people can be, as great as they are, some people do hurtful things to us, whether it's deliberate or not. Now, for myself, I'm pretty fortunate to have a small circle of people that I would trust with, my life in their hands. Now, having said that, it doesn't remove the reality that some people may try to backstab you, whether you're a target or, you're a pawn in somebody else's game. The way people can feel about us could be positive one day, but they can change on a dime. And you may not know what's necessarily happening, or even if it makes sense. So here's a story, something that happened a while back, and I'll give you the condensed version that was told secondhand to me by an old colleague. So we all worked at this big company, and allegedly they wanted to terminate an employee we both knew because supposedly this person was difficult to work with. They just grew to not like this person. And the company and the supervisors, they took a step towards termination with an initial meeting. And this allegedly was framed in a way that painted the employee as being insubordinate, incompetent, the whole 9 yards. So the person was called into a meeting by HR and the supervisors. And, they ran down the list of complaints for what would be the first step to tightening the noose to eventually, getting rid of the employee. And just as they kind of wrapped up their little spiel during this meeting, bam, the employee whips out this dossier that they had that was immaculately and strategically, sort of built, that just torpedoed each and every accusation their supervisors made. So in this meeting, man, the employee just fanned out printed emails and completed projects and calendars like a fucking defense attorney. Check and fucking mate. The company couldn't move forward like they wanted to because the employee saw the threat coming and prepared for it. So this employee really showed reasonable doubt, and the company didn't want to shoulder a lawsuit given the circumstances. So I think later, the employee ended up leaving the company for a year. Well, lasting for about a year, excuse me. But the big takeaway is that they bought themselves a year of income to find another job, do something else, through having foresight, awareness, and preparation. And what I love about this story is that this is the type of forward thinking you see from some of the villainous people I mentioned at the top of the podcast. And it's just your typical David and Goliath story, and that the little person outsmarted the big corporation with all these resources. So back to the villains, man, when you look past the poor grammar, what some people may look at as a slimy appearance, and the, especially with the backdrop of a ghetto or a third world country, these villainous people are sometimes brilliant through IQ and through action. And they're smarter than some of us, whether you like it or not. These kind of villains always have a plan, and in the game of life, they think 5, 6, and 7 steps ahead of the opposition. And And as the players and the variables of the game changes, their plans change. So there's value in adopting a villain's mentality. So why do I tell this story? Well, on a personal level, over the years, I've known people to be blindsided in life by all angles, and chances are you have too. And it's been through everything you can imagine: a messy divorce, shitty children, abusive bosses, you name it. On the conservative side, the results, through such betrayal, if you want to call it that, can be disappointment. But on the drastic side, the results have been devastation, and it's not fun to experience, and it's not fun to watch somebody you care about go through that. And what I want to help people with in general is to dampen, if not totally eliminate, the impact and shock of this kind of devastation. So I sort of touch on these elements in episode 1, but I want to dive deeper and more narrow into this kind of thing. So some of us may feel, that your life is pretty stable, and maybe it is. You may feel invincible to this kind of devastation through faith or through confidence or what have you. Or you may just be floating through life, not giving it much thought, or hoping everything pans out. And if you've been following earlier episodes of the podcast, and you probably know how I feel about that little disease I call hope, hint, hint. So here's a problem with not addressing that appropriately. The problem is that if you're not emotionally aware to address reasonable disappointment, it can knock you on your ass if the possibility of such disappointment isn't on your radar. Look, people get tired of this. No matter how great you think you are, people will get tired of you. They get tired of the same old sexual positions. They get tired of our faces. They get tired of hearing our voices. They change their minds and opinions of us for who knows why. And for those of you who are religious, God doesn't always step in to protect us. That's just life. I think the misconnection is that some of us believe and have been taught that minding our business and being a good person is enough, or busting your ass as a good friend or an employee and a lover or significant other is good. I mean, it's good social policy. But let's look at that a different way and reconnect the dots. Pain and disappointment isn't always the result of injustice per se. There's always innocent bystanders. There's always collateral damage. It could be any of us. Being a good person or a human being alone is a good thing, but that's not the sole attribute needed to survive the pain in what can sometimes be, a shitty world. Also, if we're talking about attacks from predators, we have to remember predators are silent in their pursuit and attacks. Fuck what you've seen in a movie. The whole thing about, this big cat or this dinosaur roaring as it's chasing people, that doesn't happen in real life. So here's a good rule of thumb. You want to be aware on 2 levels, an emotional level and a practical level. Being aware emotionally in terms of the possibility of we can call it emotional injury, and then being aware on a practical level in terms of what to do next should that emotional injury come to pass. It pays to rethink what a contingency plan looks and feels like to us. Now, the best plan doesn't only apply to, your business situation or, your love life. Look, it applies everywhere that you see fit, but with, of course, some nuance. So again, spouses, in-laws, some of your friends, your children, neighbors, lovers, all of it, depending on your situation. And you may think, well, hey, this is kind of paranoid or fear-based thinking. Look, I'm not talking about a 24-hour existence of people coming after you, okay? I'm talking about situational moments and just keeping some things in mind. So you may think it's horseshit, but how many times have you heard of people that you know blindsided, or secondhand you hear some story about somebody being blindsided by some event or some misdeed, and you hear people say, wow, I can't believe my lover or my husband or wife did this to me, or I can't believe that my children would ever dream of coming at me in a certain way. It happens. Those that are close to you have the best chance of hurting you just in sheer proximity, whether it's emotional or physical. They know your habits, your tendencies, your patterns, your strengths, and your vulnerabilities. And second, look, it's much better to deal with a crisis when you have a well thought out plan versus figuring it out at ground zero during the reconstruction stage and while you're emotional and not thinking clearly. This only gives your adversary an advantage to, further exploit your situation while you're fumbling through your own emotions. Now, you don't need to be a raging asshole about it, but being helpless and meek and pious and nice does not make you a virtuous person. It helps in some cases, but it really can make you an easy and unsuspecting target if you have those attributes exclusively. So what kind of plan should you have? Well, I think the first thing is to keep in mind is that you don't have to share your plan with anybody. Your plan is your plan. You don't have to help people create a blueprint of how to take advantage of you in any fashion. You don't have to totally depart from being a good person, but again, you don't have to share your blueprint with anybody. And having said that, your plan of dealing with a threat doesn't have to be some dark medieval plot. I mean, nobody's saying, look, one of my rules is don't be a fucking asshole. We're not talking about installing trap doors in your home and keeping a vial of poison and a dagger on your person at all times. This ain't the Game of Thrones or any other, those situations. So the plan I'm talking about really falls in a bucket of awareness and self-preservation. And the one thing that I really liked and learned in business school is the way you address an everyday problem is to phrase it as a question. So for the purpose of this exercise, it could be something like, you say, how do I appropriately and quietly insulate myself from reasonable threats in every aspect of my life without unnecessarily harming others? That's a decent way to phrase it. So using that as a starting point, you ask yourself a few simple questions. Number one, during a state of anger, what is the most reasonable threat that a person poses towards me? Number two, how much effort will this person or these people have to put forth to execute that threat? Number three, what is the most effective way for me to address that threat without signaling to this person or people that are close to them? And number four, is this plan accessible and can I flip a switch to put it in effect with minimal effort? Once you've answered those questions, you gotta get to work and set it up. And again, I leave you with this. Predators rarely make noise when they're on the hunt. So take care of yourself. Open your eyes. Don't romanticize your life so much where you're just helpless, okay? So that's all I got for you today. If you want to reach out through email with a comment, suggestion for an episode, the email is info@themisconnected.com. That's info@themisconnected.com. We're on every platform: iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, TuneIn, Google, YouTube. But if you're listening to it, you probably already know that. Just share that with your people. If you want to share Twitter, we are on Misconnected letter P. That's Misconnected P. Instagram, The Misconnected Podcast. Also on Patreon. Thanks for joining. Be well. Have a good one.